Hey review family, keep it tight. My name is Jay Morse, the review guy, reviewing music for the love of music, and I'm back again to bring you another video. And in this one I'm going to be covering the new Whitechapel record entitled Kin. This is a record I was very excited for, and I think a lot of longtime fans of Whitechapel, as well as newcomer fans to Whitechapel, were pretty rightfully excited for this record following up their last, The Valley. Since up until that point, the lane that Whitechapel sort of felt in was the early days of deathcore, where it was very brutal. It usually wouldn't be very technical. It was a lot more meat and bones. The vocals didn't really have too much technique to them and were more so just cookie cutter. People like Mitch Lucker, people like Oliver Sykes back in the early days, and people like Phil Bozeman, who have inspired countless vocalists with his very unique style of guttural growl that has become very signature to lead Whitechapel through many records that have become classics. But through the 2010s, they sort of had a rough patch where their material sort of felt a little more lackluster, less well-defined, and started to fall prey to feeling very mundane, comparatively speaking, with many of the records that were coming out of the deathcore genre in the 2010s, specifically the latter half, and felt very ingenious, more technical, more fleshed out, much of the time with different influences being brought into the fold, bands like Lorna Shore and Worm Shepherd bringing in a lot of black metal influences, and that's not even getting into the progressive deathcore movement. They basically became the Cannibal Corpse of deathcore. It wasn't anything that was bad, it was just good, but it never went past that. The Valley, however, as a divergent point, was pretty awesome, because it showed that even if you diverge your sound a little bit, you can still be a really good band with a really neat sound, and it showed Whitechapel flexing their artistic muscles past their roots while still maintaining their original flair. While it could be considered more safe at points, it's also much more mature, featuring a lot more singing in general, sung choruses, melody, harmony, and it felt a step up in maturity from prior records, both lyrically, conceptually, instrumentally, production-wise. So I was curious if Kin would follow in its footsteps, at least stylistically, and the easy answer is yes. It services as sort of like a halfway concept record, but not quite. Following in the footsteps lyrically, the very first track, I Will Find You, talking about the valley going up in flames. The imagery painted across this record is very harrowing, very poetic, genuinely some of the most powerful lyrics they've written up until this point, but it's not just the lyrics, but also the performance that goes the extra mile to emphasize what is being said. There's a specific excerpt that I want to read, a whole section that really stuck out to me that I have here. A beast will always smell the blood of a coward, and a narrow-minded fool will always follow down the narrow path to the blade that can make a god bleed. Still you are weak, you're just a boy with his mother's eyes who carries the weight of his father's heart. It's that level of poeticism between these really awesome, all-encompassing instrumentals and Phil Bozeman's really powerful leads, both destructive growls and screams and also more melodic and sort of understated, downtrodden, melancholic vocals that sort of reminds me of like a halfway between a Trent Reznor and a Chris Cornell. But don't worry, they're not losing their edge. You're still getting the signature blast beats and really twisted guitar solos and Phil Bozeman's absolutely amazing raw vocals. However, those valleyisms do remain. And I appreciate the attempt to layer grooves into the heaviness. It feels like they have paid more mind to constructing these metallic sections with a lot more heart, a lot more gusto to not make them seem just as base level as they've been in the past. But I can't help but feel like sometimes when they clean up their sound, make it very delicate, make it very ornate, make it very mechanical and touched up, they can either fall prey to staleness or feeling a little too manufactured. I will not say that they have lost their ingenuity at all, but a lot of tracks, especially in the second half of this record, once it reaches the midpoint, do feel a lot like their 2010s catalog. And it's those moments of clarity of sort of interesting bits, interesting progressions that set it apart, but sometimes I don't know if it does enough of that. Perfectly okay, but nothing more. You could pick them out from any pack of Whitechapel tracks. And unfortunately, even though they're like my favorite parts on this record, I think even melodically, especially in the chorus work, they can get a little overly ambitious for their own good. Anti-Cure's hook really does blend in so heavily with other chorus choruses here, as well as many choruses off the Valley, and they lose a lot of steam in that regard. And behind all this, I think the creativity at times begins to fizzle. Plucked introductions, dreary hooks, and a throttling, chugging riff that is usually bedecked by stationary mids, Whitechapel sort of reveals a very clear pattern and formula to the way they write the music on this record, and pretty much situate themselves right in the center of that, and don't do much to change it up throughout the runtime. With that being said, Kin is still a very consistent record with a lot of great ideas put behind it, and Whitechapel scratches a certain deathcore itch that progressively I think a lot more bands are sort of losing sight of, which is the roots where they came from. Sometimes you get too technical, sometimes you get too over the top, and that's coming from a staunch advocate for very hyper-technical metal. Whitechapel remains to be one of the more consistent deathcore bands, and though they can get a little ambitious for their own good, overall these tracks are written very tightly and have an awesome production to it. And while I wouldn't say this is like the first record that I would recommend to people that would want to get into Whitechapel, or even the second or third, it is a pretty good point in their discography and excites me to see how much they're going to continue on this path of melodicism and harmony in the future. I'm going to be giving this album a 6.5 out of 10. And that is a wrap. Have you heard this new Whitechapel record, Kin? If you have, let me know in the comment section below what you thought about it. I would love to discuss this record with you. Be sure to like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to join the review family today, and smash that notification bell to be notified of my future uploads. You know who it is. My name is Jay Morris, the Review Guy, and I'm signing off saying farewell.